"Don't cry, sir. You can have my mama," the boy said to the lonely Alpha King sitting in the garden. The garden was quiet, but not empty. The wind whispered through the tall hedges, carrying the scent of wet stone and night-blooming flowers. Lanterns swayed on iron posts, casting soft pools of golden light on the cobbled paths. Shadows clung to every corner, curling around the twisted roots of ancient trees. The kingdom slept under the weight of a moonless night, but in the center of the garden, a man sat alone. He was called the Alpha King, though few dared speak his name aloud. Crowns and thrones had brought him nothing but silence. His cloak of midnight velvet draped over the bench where he hunched, hands resting heavily on his knees. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, stared at the fountain before him. Water rippled lazily, reflecting a distorted image of the man who ruled a kingdom yet seemed forgotten by it. Lonely. That word clung to him more than any title, heavier than any crown. He had known power and fear, loyalty and reverence, but never companionship. And tonight, as the wind stirred the dark petals around him, he let himself feel the emptiness. For the first time in years, he allowed a single, silent tear to fall. The tear fell unnoticed, until a small voice broke the stillness. "Don't cry, sir," it said. The king froze. His storm-gray eyes lifted, scanning the garden for the speaker. A boy, no older than 10, stepped lightly across the cobblestones. His dark hair was messy, and his feet were bare, yet he walked with a confidence the king could not name. There was a bravery in his small frame that made the Alpha King both wary and intrigued. I can help," the boy continued, his voice trembling, though only slightly. "You can have my mama." The king blinked, unsure whether to laugh, scowl, or retreat into a silence. No one had ever offered him anything so strange, so simple, yet so impossibly human. "Mama?" he asked carefully, his voice low, like a shadow brushing against glass. "Yes," the boy said, stepping closer. His eyes were wide and earnest. "She is kind. She will sit with you, talk with you. You won't be lonely anymore." For a heartbeat, the king's chest tightened. Loneliness had become his armor, yet here was a boy so small, daring to pierce it with words as fragile as spring blossoms. The king studied him. He noted the dirt under the boy's nails, the way his hands trembled slightly, the bravery in his posture. And beneath it all, the boy was offering something rare: compassion, unshaken by fear. "Why would you do this?" the king asked finally, his voice softer now.
Why would you offer something so precious to me?
The boy shrugged, his eyes never leaving the king's. "Because I know what it's like to be alone."
"And you look very sad." The Alpha King did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the boy, really looked. The boy's offer was innocent, simple, yet it stirred a long-forgotten part of the king's heart, a part that had been buried beneath years of duty, grief, and fear. He wanted to reach out to touch the boy's small shoulder to tell him that he mattered, but words failed him. Finally he said, "Very well. Bring her here." The boy's face lit up like the first light of dawn. "Yes, sir." And before the king could stop him, the boy ran through the hedges, disappearing into the shadows. The Alpha King remained on the bench, silent, watching the fountain. A strange unease filled him, not born of fear but of curiosity. For the first time the castle walls felt smaller, the throne heavier, and the world beyond the garden, alive with possibility. Minutes stretched, the fountain gurgled, the wind whispered, and the king's mind wandered to memories he had tried long ago to forget. A queen lost, a betrayal that had hollowed him, laughter that no longer belonged in his halls. All of it came back tonight, sharp as the edge of a blade. Footsteps approached, slower this time, deliberate. The boy returned, his hand clutching a woman's. She was tall, graceful, her dark hair tied back simply, and her eyes reflected the strength of someone who had survived sorrow yet refused to be broken. She was the boy's mama. The Alpha King stood, instinctively rigid. He had never been this close to someone whose presence demanded respect and attention, without demanding fear. The woman bowed slightly. "My king," she said, her voice gentle yet steady. "Your garden is beautiful." "It is," the king replied, his voice softer than before. "Sit, if you wish." She moved carefully, keeping a distance that was polite but not cold. The boy tugged her hand and whispered, "See, he's not so scary. He's lonely." The king glanced down at the boy. The child's honesty was piercing, his simplicity bold. For decades the king had ruled through fear, through the cold certainty that no one could touch him. Yet here was a boy, offering him a piece of warmth he had forgotten even existed. Why do you stay here in the garden?" the woman asked finally, curiosity hidden behind caution. The king's eyes drifted to the fountain again. "It is quiet here. The world outside is heavy. Here, I can think." The boy interrupted, a grin breaking across his face. "And you can cry!" "He isn't used to people being kind," she said quietly. "Perhaps you can help him." The king felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, a longing, gentle and dangerous. He wanted to know more, to hear her voice in the corridors, to see her walk through the castle not as a stranger but as someone human. The boy, sensing the king's hesitation, whispered, "He will like you, Mama." "I know it." The king's gaze softened, and for a moment the weight of his crown felt lighter. Yet even as warmth spread through him, a shadow lingered at the edges of the garden. Years of betrayal, curses, and lost love made him wary. He wanted to reach out, but part of him feared that to care would be to lose control, to risk pain again. The woman noticed the shadow in his eyes. "You are not alone," she said softly. "Even in sorrow, there is hope." Her words, simple as they were, struck something buried deep within him. The Alpha King's hands trembled slightly, though he hid it. He had not spoken these words to anyone in years, and yet tonight he wanted to speak, to ask, to reach. But the words died on his lips. The boy, sensing the tension, climbed onto the fountain edge. "Do you like the stars?" he asked suddenly, pointing upward. The moon had not risen, but tiny points of light sparkled faintly through gaps in the clouds. "They are distant," the king said, his voice quieter now. "But beautiful." The boy smiled. "Sometimes the distant things are the ones worth reaching for." The king did not reply. Instead, he watched as the boy laughed softly, the sound bright and pure, echoing through the garden like a melody he had long forgotten. The wind stirred again, carrying with it the faint scent of night-blooming flowers. A single petal floated down and landed on the boy's hair. The king reached out instinctively, catching it before it touched the boy's shoulder. His hand lingered in the air longer than it should have. "You are not afraid of me," the king said finally. "I am not afraid of lonely people," the boy said simply, shrugging. The king's chest tightened. Loneliness had been his companion for so long that he had forgotten what it meant to have someone choose to stay, to care. The boy's courage, so small and unassuming, stirred something deep within him, an ache, a longing, and perhaps a hope. The woman spoke then, quietly, reverently.
"Even kings need someone to see them."
To know them. The king looked at her. He wanted to say yes, to let the walls crumble around him, but he could not yet. He could only nod, a small, almost imperceptible motion, and sit back. He let the silence stretch between them, heavy with meaning, yet soft with the promise of change. The boy yawned suddenly, tiredness finally catching him. "We should go, Mama," he said. The woman nodded, taking her son's hand. Before leaving, the boy turned back.
"Don't cry, sir. I will bring you more stories tomorrow."
"You can have my mama again." The Alpha King's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. Almost. He watched them walk away hand in hand, disappearing into the shadows beyond the garden. He remained on the bench long after they had gone. The lanterns flickered in the wind. The fountain rippled. And in the quiet of the garden, the Alpha King allowed himself to wonder, for the first time in decades, whether loneliness could truly be undone. A single petal drifted from a tree and landed at his feet. He picked it up. It was fragile, yet it carried a weight he could not name. Perhaps it was hope. Perhaps it was the beginning of something that could pierce even the deepest shadows of his heart. And somewhere in the distance, hidden among the twisting hedges, a symbol carved in stone glimmered faintly, as if the garden itself had marked the night with promise and warning. The king looked at it, his eyes, storm gray and steady, softened. For the first time he felt a spark of emotion not bound by fear, duty, or sorrow. He felt curiosity, and he wondered, when the boy returned tomorrow, what else might he bring? The castle was alive with whispers, though none dared speak them aloud to the Alpha King. Stone walls that had stood for centuries now seemed to hum with unease. Courtiers moved through shadowed corridors with careful steps, their voices low and urgent. The king's loneliness had been known to all, yet no one understood the strange, quiet change that had begun to ripple through him after that night in the garden. He walked the corridors slowly, his cloak brushing the cold stone, hands clasped behind his back. The echo of his footsteps reminded him that he was still alone in the halls of power. Yet the garden's memory lingered like sunlight through mist. The boy's bold eyes, his soft laughter, the promise of a gentle mother who could heal something even the king did not yet know was broken. The boy had not come yet today, nor had his mother. The king wondered if perhaps he had imagined the entire encounter. But the faint perfume of night-blooming flowers clung to the corners of his mind, a reminder that the garden, and its strange visitors, was real. A sound broke the stillness, the soft clatter of armored boots. The king turned sharply. 2 courtiers approached, bowing with meticulous care. Their eyes flickered with both fear and calculation. "Your Majesty," one began, voice trembling slightly, "we have news of the northern border. The rival houses grow bold. They claim they will march if you do not submit to their demands." The king's storm-gray eyes narrowed. He had expected this, of course. Power always attracted those eager to take it by force. But the timing was peculiar. The boy's words in the garden, innocent as they were, made the threat feel heavier, more urgent. "I will see them," the king said simply, his voice cold as the stones beneath their feet. "Prepare the war room." They had grown accustomed to the king's calm, calculated presence, but there was something different in his tone today, something softer, yet infinitely sharper. They left quickly, leaving the king to his thoughts. Alone again, he returned to the garden. The courtyard was empty, save for a lone fountain. Water shimmered under the dim lantern light. He knelt beside it, tracing a finger through the rippling surface. The symbol from the night before glimmered faintly as though carved by magic itself. The king studied it closely. It was unfamiliar, an intricate pattern of lines and curves that seemed to shift whenever he looked directly at it. He had seen many symbols in his life, crests of power, marks of loyalty, curses etched by those seeking vengeance. But this was different. It pulsed with quiet life, as if it had been waiting for him. A soft rustle behind him made him turn. The boy stepped from the shadows, hand in hand with his mother. "Sir," the boy whispered, voice filled with triumph, "we came back." The king's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "Almost." "I see," he said, standing slowly. He observed the mother carefully, noting her measured grace and the quiet strength in her eyes. "You honor my garden with your return." The woman bowed slightly. "It is a gift, Your Majesty, if you will accept it." The boy tugged at her hand. "Mama?" "He looks different today. He seems happier." The king's storm-gray eyes softened imperceptibly. He did not answer immediately. He had not allowed anyone to see him this way in decades. Curiosity, vulnerability, and even a trace of longing. The boy's innocence was a mirror, reflecting what the king had lost, and perhaps what he could regain. The courtyard remained silent for a few moments, filled only with the soft trickle of water and the rustling of leaves. Then the woman spoke, her voice low but firm. "I have heard of your burdens, Alpha King. The kingdom, the loneliness, I understand more than most might think. The king's gaze flicked to her. And what would you know of such things? I know what it is to protect someone I love, she said simply, to carry fear and hope in equal measure, to stand in the face of danger and still choose compassion. The boy looked at his mother, eyes wide. I told you, sir, she is brave. The king regarded her, noting the unshakable calm in her presence. And yet beneath that calm, he sensed layers of unspoken sorrow. Her courage did not mask her pain. It contained it, carried it silently. The king, who had ruled through fear and solitude, found himself drawn to that quiet strength. Very well, he said at last. Stay, but be warned. The castle is not as kind as the garden. Its walls do not forgive easily. The boy grinned, stepping forward. We are not afraid, sir. We will be careful. Even as he spoke, the Alpha King felt the stirrings of something dangerous in his chest. Hope. It was a foreign thing, delicate and terrifying, but it flickered insistently, refusing to be ignored. Yet the outside world had no patience for hope. News arrived later that day of unrest in the northern provinces. Rival houses moved under cover of darkness, plotting to exploit the king's rare vulnerability. Courtiers whispered of the strange visitors in the garden, questioning their intentions and casting suspicion on the boy's mother. The king, who had once relied solely on power and fear to maintain his rule, now faced a dilemma: protect his kingdom or protect the fragile connection forming in the garden. His mind churned. Power demanded vigilance. The heart demanded trust. He had never been tested in both at once. As the sun set, he summoned his council. Maps were unfurled, messengers' reports read aloud, and strategies debated. The king's presence was commanding, yet measured. He weighed every word, every possibility. Yet his thoughts returned again and again to the boy, to his mother, to the garden. At night he returned there, seeking the solace it offered. The boy and his mother were already waiting. Sir, the boy said, will you tell us a story tonight? The king considered it. He had never told stories to anyone save for himself in the quiet of the castle walls. Yet tonight felt different. Perhaps the garden, perhaps the boy, had softened him in ways he did not understand. I will, he said finally. He began a tale not of kings or battles, but of a man who had lost everything and wandered through darkness, seeking light. The boy listened, enraptured, while his mother observed quietly, noting the subtle changes in the king's tone. The slight curve of his lips, the storm in his eyes that now seemed less permanent. As the story ended, the boy yawned, his small shoulders sagging in exhaustion. Tomorrow, more stories? He asked. Yes, the king said, surprising himself with the word. Tomorrow we will continue. The Alpha King remained in the garden after they left, staring at the symbol etched into the stones. Its glow had faded, yet its presence lingered. He could not shake the feeling that it was a warning as much as a promise, a herald of events yet to come. He wondered what forces were stirring beyond the castle walls, in lands ruled by ambition and malice. He wondered how long he could protect the boy and his mother without exposing his own heart. And, unbidden, he wondered whether he was ready to allow himself to feel again, to risk love and fear in equal measure. The castle walls, once cold and unyielding, now seemed like cages. The king's thoughts turned inward. He realized that his loneliness had not been merely solitude. It had been a shield protecting him from loss, from betrayal, from hope itself. But the boy, with his simple honesty, and the mother, with her quiet courage, were breaking that shield piece by piece. And in that breaking, the Alpha King felt something dangerous yet exhilarating, the stirring of change. Outside, the wind carried the faintest whisper of movement. Shadows shifted in the corners of the garden. The symbol, etched in stone, seemed to shimmer for a brief moment before fading completely. The king's storm-gray eyes narrowed. He was no stranger to danger, nor to the unseen forces that often whispered in dark places. Whatever awaited, he knew this. The boy and his mother were now part of his life, and he would not let them vanish. Yet, as dawn approached, The king understood that the garden's calm was only temporary. The rival houses would strike, the castle walls would tremble, and the forces of fear and ambition would test him in ways he had never anticipated. The question was not whether he could face them, but whether he could face them while carrying the fragile light of hope in his heart. For the first time in decades, the Alpha King felt the weight of true responsibility, not as a ruler, but as a man. A man who had been touched by compassion, who had glimpsed the possibility of connection, and who now feared both the loss and the fulfillment of that possibility. The boy's laughter echoed in his memory. The mother's quiet courage resonated within him. The symbol in the stone pulsed faintly, a reminder that the world watched, that destiny moved even as he did. The king made a decision. He would protect them. He would face the coming storms. And he would do so not with fear alone, but with the strange, terrifying strength of a heart slowly learning to feel. And somewhere beyond the castle walls, shadows began to gather, unseen and patient, waiting for the moment to test the Alpha King and the fragile bonds forming in the Garden of Shadows. The northern wind bit sharply as the Alpha King rode through the outskirts of his kingdom. His horse's hooves struck the frozen ground in steady rhythm, echoing against the barren trees. The boy had been taken. The courtiers' whispers had become frantic cries, yet no one knew who had dared commit such a crime, or why. The king had only one certainty: he would not fail. Not now, not ever. The forest loomed ahead, a place of twisted roots and half-seen shadows, where light seemed to fear to tread. Known as the Cursed Woods, it was a realm where travelers were tested, and the unseen forces of the kingdom's old magic whispered, like ghosts. Many had entered, few had returned, but the king did not falter. His cloak flapped in the wind, his eyes storm-gray and sharp, cutting through the darkness like a blade. Beside him rode no courtiers, no guards. He had left them behind. This was a journey he had to take alone. Power and fear had served him well in the halls of the castle, but they would not guide him through the labyrinth of the forest. Only resolve, and perhaps the fragile spark of humanity that the boy had ignited in him, would see him through. The forest was alive with subtle movement. Twigs snapped under invisible feet, leaves rustled, though no wind stirred them. Shadows leaned unnaturally from the gnarled trunks, and every so often, faint glimmers of light flickered between the trees. It was as if the woods themselves watched, judging the Alpha King's intentions. He dismounted and pressed forward on foot, boots crunching in frost. The air grew colder, heavier, as though the forest sought to push him back, to test his determination. Memories rose unbidden. The nights he had spent alone on the castle's ramparts, the faces of those he had failed, the betrayal that had hollowed him. Loneliness had been his armor, but now it felt like a chain he had to break if he was to rescue the boy. "Where are you?" he muttered, voice low, almost swallowed by the wind. "Who has taken you?" A faint sound drifted to him, soft, like a child's sigh. He followed it, moving quickly yet cautiously. The trees grew closer together, their branches forming a tangled canopy that swallowed the dim light. Then, in a small clearing, he saw them. The boy seated upon a bed of frost-kissed leaves, and a hooded figure standing before him. "Sir!" he cried, relief and fear mingling in his voice. "You came!" Beneath the shadowed cloak, the king glimpsed eyes that glimmered unnaturally. He recognized the magic immediately. It was not mere human trickery, but old, potent sorcery, the kind that whispered of curses and forgotten power. "Step back, Alpha King," the figure said, voice smooth, controlled. "Do not risk the boy. Leave now, and your kingdom will remain intact." "Do not threaten him," he said. His voice, low and steady, carried the weight of command. "Do you understand? You will release him, or you will face the consequences." The figure laughed softly. "You are bold, but boldness cannot undo what has been set in motion. The boy is part of a plan much greater than your lonely heart." The king's gaze swept the clearing. He noticed faint runes etched into the earth, glowing a dull red in the frost. The forest had not been a random place. It had been prepared, shaped by the unseen hand of someone who understood both magic and fear. And yet, the king did not falter. He drew himself to full height. "I am not the man I once was," he said, voice rising, storm-gray eyes fierce. "I may have been alone before, but now I am not. I will face any darkness to bring him home." There was a pause, heavy and taut, as though the forest itself held its breath. Then the figure raised a hand, releasing a pulse of shadowy energy that shimmered through the clearing. The king did not dodge. He stepped forward into it, feeling the cold bite of the magic, the pressure on his mind, the tug at his soul. But he pressed on, each step fueled by the memory of the boy's laughter, the mother's quiet courage, the warmth that had touched a heart long encased in ice. "You are stronger than I expected," the figure said, voice strained now. "Stronger and human." The king's storm-gray eyes met the hooded figure's gaze.
"I am human," he said simply, "and I care."
"That is my strength. That is what you cannot understand." With a roar that seemed to shake the forest itself, the king moved faster. The runes flared, the shadows writhed, but he reached the boy, scooping him into his arms. The child clung tightly, face buried against the king's shoulder. Sir," the boy whispered, voice muffled. "I knew you would come." The king's lips pressed against the boy's hair, feeling warmth where he had only known cold. "I told you," he said quietly. "I will not fail you." The hooded figure stepped back, realizing the king's resolve could not be broken by fear or magic alone. You may have heart, Alpha King," the figure said, voice low, "but heart alone will not undo destiny." The king ignored the words, turning his gaze toward the forest path that led back to the castle. "Destiny is not fixed," he said firmly. "It bends to those who refuse to yield." The forest seemed to sense his determination. The shadows lifted slightly, the runes dimmed, and the path ahead cleared as though recognizing the king's purpose. He carried the boy, moving steadily toward home, yet every step weighed heavily on him. The journey had been short, yet it felt like hours, filled with trials that tested his courage, patience, and the very limits of his heart. The boy's mother waited at the castle gates, worry etched deep in her eyes. When she saw the king approach carrying her child safely, her breath caught, and for a moment she feared she had imagined the moment. "You," she said softly, stepping forward. "You saved him." The king placed the boy down gently. The child ran into his mother's arms, clinging tightly, yet his eyes never left the Alpha King. "Sir," he whispered, voice trembling, "we are safe because of you." The king nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile forming. "Because of all of you," he said quietly. "You remind me that there is more to life than power." The woman studied him, noticing the way his hands shook slightly, the storm in his eyes tempered now by gratitude, fear, and a stirring of something new. "You feel deeply," she said quietly, "even when you try not to." The king looked away, brushing a hand across his face. "I am learning," he admitted. "It is dangerous, but it is necessary." The boy grinned, tugging at the king's cloak. "Teach me magic next time," he said, eyes sparkling with hope. The king chuckled softly, a sound not heard in decades within the castle walls. "Perhaps," he said, "but first we recover." That night the castle was alive with a quiet energy. Guards were doubled, patrols intensified, yet the king felt something he had not felt in years: peace. The boy slept in his mother's room, safe and warm. The Alpha King walked through the corridors, his steps lighter, his thoughts fuller. But even as he felt the warmth of connection, a shadow lingered at the edges of the castle. The hooded figure had not vanished entirely. Its presence remained, unseen, patient, waiting for the moment to strike again. The king paused in the garden, looking at the fountain where the journey had begun. The water shimmered faintly in the moonlight, reflecting a storm-gray face softened by care and longing. He reached down, touching the surface. "I will protect them," he whispered. "No matter what comes, the forest, the rival houses, the ancient forces that moved unseen, all of it waited. And the Alpha King knew that tomorrow would bring new trials. But tonight, he allowed himself a single, fragile moment of hope. A hand rested lightly on his shoulder. He turned. It was the boy's mother. "You risked yourself for them," she said softly. "For the boy." "For me? Why?" "Because sometimes what we protect is not power or titles. Sometimes it is the light that reminds us we are human." She studied him, and for the first time, the walls he had built around himself seemed to crumble slightly. "Then, perhaps there is hope," she said, a quiet smile touching her lips. The king looked toward the boy's window where a faint glow indicated he was asleep, dreaming. The small spark of life, courage, and laughter rested safely, for now. But he knew the trials were far from over. The forces that had tried to take the boy would not be idle, and the magic that lingered in the forest had not been entirely defeated. He clenched his fists, the weight of responsibility heavy yet comforting. For the first time he realized that courage was not only about facing enemies, it was about facing oneself. About confronting loneliness, fear, and the long-buried longing for connection. And deep within the shadows something ancient stirred, recognizing the spark that had been lit in the heart of the Alpha King, a spark that could not be extinguished without a struggle that would shake the kingdom itself. Dawn broke slowly over the kingdom, soft light spilling across the walls of the castle, painting stone in hues of gold and rose. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of frost and blooming flowers, as if the world itself held its breath. The Alpha King stood at the highest tower, storm-gray eyes scanning the horizon. The forest, once a place of shadows and trials, lay quiet in the early light. For now the boy was safe, and the kingdom remained intact, but the king knew the calm was fragile. The night had tested him in ways that power alone could never measure. He had faced magic older than the oldest stone, shadowed foes who had sought to take what mattered most. He had walked through fear, through uncertainty, through the lingering weight of loneliness. And yet, through it all, he had discovered something long lost. The courage to feel, and the strength to protect those who mattered to him most. Below the tower, the courtyard was alive with quiet movement. The boy ran toward him, small feet pattering across the cobblestones. Behind him followed his mother, her dark hair tied back neatly, her eyes reflecting pride and relief. The Alpha King felt an unfamiliar warmth stir in his chest, a mixture of admiration, longing, and something deeper, something unspoken. "Sir!" the boy cried, running to the base of the tower. "The forest, it was scary, but you saved me." The king smiled faintly, a gesture so rare it seemed almost fragile. "I promised I would, did I not?" His voice, low and steady, carried the weight of authority and care alike. "No harm will come to you if I can prevent it." The boy threw himself into the king's shadow, eyes wide with awe. "I knew you would come," he whispered. "I knew you wouldn't leave me alone." The mother stepped closer, placing a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. Her gaze met the king's, steady and unflinching. "You risked yourself for him," she said softly. "For both of us." "Why?" The king's eyes, storm-gray and deep, met hers. For a moment he hesitated, feeling the weight of decades of solitude and regret. Then he said quietly, "Because sometimes what we protect is more important than crowns or power. Sometimes it is the light that reminds us we are human." Her lips curved into a faint smile, one that held both relief and a growing understanding. "Then perhaps there is hope," she said, her voice gentle yet firm. Hope. The word lingered in the morning air, fragile yet unstoppable. The Alpha King had spent a lifetime surrounded by shadows. Yet now he felt the promise of light, flickering just beyond reach but growing stronger with every heartbeat. Yet even in this quiet moment, the world reminded him that trials were never far behind. From the edge of the forest, a ripple of darkness moved. The hooded figure, the one who had orchestrated the boy's capture, had not vanished. Their power had been challenged, yet not defeated. The castle walls, though strong, could not keep all threats at bay. The king knew he would have to face the final test, the one that would determine not just his power, but the strength of his heart. He gathered his sword, not as a weapon of conquest, but as a symbol of protection. His cloak fluttered behind him, and for the first time he did not feel the weight of loneliness pressing down. He had allies now, fragile and human, yet stronger than any army. The boy, whose courage had reminded him of hope, and the woman, whose quiet strength had steadied him in ways he could not yet name. The hooded figure emerged from the forest, eyes gleaming with dark magic and defiance. "Alpha King," they said, voice sharp, "you have survived trials meant to break you. But this is the final moment. Will you protect your heart as well as your throne?" The king's gaze did not waver. "I will protect both," he said firmly. "No shadow, no curse, no threat can take them from me." The figure laughed, and magic flared, twisting the air like fire and ice. The forest trembled, shadows coiling and writhing. Yet the king stepped forward without fear. His every step was measured, controlled, and yet charged with the raw power of someone who had faced loss and emerged stronger. The battle that followed was not one of mere force, but of will. Shadows clawed at him. Whispers tried to shake his resolve. Illusions tested his mind. He saw visions of the boy lost, of the mother taken, of the kingdom falling into darkness. Yet each time, the king drew strength from the memory of their faces, their courage, their trust in him. With a single deliberate motion, he struck at the core of the shadow, the dark pulse of magic shattering under the force of his determination. The hooded figure recoiled, realizing that power alone was not enough. The king's heart, human, unguarded, full of care, was stronger than any spell. The figure vanished, leaving only the quiet rustle of leaves in its wake. The forest settled, no longer threatening, as if it acknowledged the victory not just of power, but of courage, trust, and connection. The Alpha King lowered his sword, chest heaving, hands trembling slightly from exertion. The boy ran to him, clinging tightly. You did it," he cried. The king smiled faintly, brushing a hand across the boy's hair. "We did it," he said softly. "Together." The mother approached, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You have changed," she said, voice quiet yet firm, "not just as a king, but as a man. You have opened your heart." The king looked at her, storm gray eyes softer now, filled with something long forbidden, vulnerability, admiration, and perhaps the faintest stirrings of love. "I am learning," he admitted. "It is dangerous but necessary. I cannot hide behind fear forever." The boy laughed, tugging at both their hands. "Then we can have stories together. All the stories we want." The Alpha King felt warmth spread through him, stronger than any magic he had faced. For the first time in decades, he allowed himself to truly smile, unburdened by fear or loneliness. The garden, the castle, the kingdom, all seemed brighter, as though the world itself had acknowledged his transformation. Days passed, and the bonds deepened. The king walked the castle halls with a lighter step, greeting his people with kindness as well as authority. He shared quiet moments in the garden with the boy and his mother, telling stories, teaching small lessons of courage, and listening to their laughter. The castle, once cold and foreboding, now carried echoes of joy, hope, and the fragile beauty of trust. Yet the king never forgot the shadows that had once threatened the boy. He strengthened the kingdom's defenses, trained his people not just in arms but in wisdom, preparing for threats both seen and unseen. He had learned that leadership was not merely about fear. It was about protection, compassion, and courage of the heart. One evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, the king stood in the garden, watching the boy chase fireflies through the soft twilight. The mother sat nearby, a book in her lap, smiling quietly as she watched the small scene of joy and light. The Alpha King felt a stirring deep within him, a feeling of peace that had once seemed impossible. He had faced the abyss, walked through shadows, and emerged transformed. The loneliness that had defined him for so long had given way to connection, trust, and perhaps even love. The boy ran to him again, eyes sparkling. "Sir! Look! The fireflies are following us!" The king bent down, lifting the boy into his arms. "Yes," he said softly. "They are following the light." The boy giggled, resting his head against the king's shoulder. "Just like us, sir?" The king smiled, storm-gray eyes warm and steady. "Just like us," he replied. As night fully settled over the kingdom, the stars above seemed to shine brighter, reflecting the hope and courage that now lived within the castle walls. The Alpha King understood something crucial. True power was not measured by fear, but by the strength to protect what was precious and the courage to allow oneself to feel. The forest no longer whispered threats. The shadows had been challenged and held at bay. Yet somewhere deep in the edges of the kingdom, faint traces of magic still lingered, a reminder that vigilance was eternal and that destiny, though tested, had been shaped by courage and heart. The boy's mother approached the king, her hand brushing lightly against his arm. "You are changed," she said softly. "And perhaps that is the greatest victory of all." The king looked at her storm-gray eyes, softened with warmth. "Change is not always easy," he admitted, "but it is worth it." The boy tugged at both their hands, laughing.
Then we can stay together.
"Forever." The king looked at them both, his heart swelling with a strange, fragile joy. "Yes," he said quietly. "Together, always." And in that moment, as the fireflies danced and the stars reflected the promise of new beginnings, the Alpha King understood the truth he had long denied. Redemption, love, and hope could bloom even in the darkest of places, and that the courage to open one's heart was the most powerful magic. The garden, once a place of shadow and loneliness, now stood as a testament to resilience, trust, and the promise of dawn. The Alpha King, the boy, and his mother remained there, together, ready to face whatever the world might bring, their hearts intertwined by courage, care, and the quiet power of love.